Hey guys, so today we're doing another stunt rigging toolbox talk. I'm trying to do some other work, and the saw is grinding away, cutting through a 300 millimeter chunk of solid billet to make a new hub for the braking system, which takes forever. So I thought I'd do this. And we want to talk about descenders today, descending and descenders, this piece of equipment. They come in various shapes and sizes, and I'll give a little history. First, housekeeping. Thank you to everybody for all your texts and messages and emails and shit. Seems like we've got an audience, shockingly enough, as far away as Brazil, all over Europe, India, Los Angeles, Canada, Sweden, Norway. So, I mean, it's kind of cool. Second question is people ask if I do any rigging seminars. I can and will if it's correct. I mean, these things cost me money to make these videos because I break a lot of expensive shit. Luckily, I make the gold tails, and you know, shackles aren't that much at 18 euro a pop or whatever. But after a while, it adds up. Plus, the tester eats up electricity and parts, and you know, it is what it is. So, if I can make it financially viable, I would do it. People have asked. If you're really interested, the easiest way, because I don't have a training hall here, is for me to come to you, you set up in your training hall with what you have, we optimize your stuff, and then we go over all the basics, math and science style, so that you learn how to assess things rather than just pull options out of your bag of tricks, okay? Because that's a rote approach, that's not a knowledge approach, that's bro science, which rules our industry. People do stuff for absolutely no reason. It's kind of like the old wives' tale about how many presses on a Nyko sleeve, or double sleeving wire back when I started. And you read the literature, it says and then you come to reality with people, oh no, it's... So rather than deal with that shit, which I don't do bro science, we do math and physics, and that way you know a basis of how to do stuff and approach it. Yes, there are certain things that don't like scream out for a slack line. There are things that scream out for a pendulum. There are things that scream out for a track system. You can assess all those, but within that framework, knowing the math and what's going to work with where you are, because it's always different. You know, I saw something this morning, they're like, oh, we want to fly somebody, the ceiling will hold 250 kilo. Well, that's pretty fucking useless. So it means a ground-based support rig, You know, there's implications to everything. And if you know the math, then you can work out the best scenario. Anyway, so we will do them if there's enough interest to cover the bills to do that, and the time. Because time not spent here is time not earning money if I'm not in the shop, or if I want to show, obviously I can't take off to do it. So right now that's that. I'm willing and ready and able to do it, even though, as several people have said, I am a little too brutally honest, but they like that, but that's completely different. I don't candy coat anything. I mean, fuck that. I was trained by old men who had really bad attitudes, and you know, whether it was in the machine shop or in stunts, or in any of the other careers I had prior to this silly thing, the old crusty fuckers had zero patience, but you learned. You know, it was one of those things, you learned about everything. So yes, we would do them, thank you for asking, but it won't be bro science. It ain't gonna be endless stories and then pulling out like, for this gag, you use this trick, for this gag, no, it's gonna, how to assess it, it's gonna be an empirical approach, just like we do here, okay? So now descenders, that's today's topic. I thought of descenders because I took off the old cone, which you see behind me here. Very nice, very cute, 250 millimeter long, easy cone, which is great for huge, long drops. Not so good for stages and stuff. And so we went to the bigger, harsher one. It still has a relatively decent cone on it. This is called a right frustrum. It's a cone. That's the correct geometrical term for it, plus the top. Now, descenders have been around for about 100 years. They used them prior to World War II to train paratroopers, jumping out of towers, so guys would know how it feels to land with all their fucking gear on their Bergens and rucksacks that weigh, you know, gazillion fucking kilos. So they learned how to land and learn what it felt like before they actually came out of a plane. In the early days, they had these drums, and they had a fan on the end. Now, descenders function based on two factors, okay? One is the distance of rollout on this cone and free fall area, and two is the increasing resistance that's applied however you apply your resistance, okay? Meaning the faster this fucker spins, the faster your resistance item moves, so that it increases the resistance. These are two things that interplay. So you got to know that. Now, when I said roll out, roll out's kind of a car racing term, but it applies to anything that's circular. One wrap of this drum, one time around this drum is over a meter, is a little shade over a meter. It's done with pi r squared, or pi times the diameter. 3.14159 tells you how far the circumference is around this, which means that's the length you will roll out from where you start till you get back to your point again. So this is a meter on this drum, okay? As you come down this cone, you decrease your diameters or your radius, whichever you're comfortable to talk about. Okay, remember, radius is half the distance from the middle of this shaft to your outside. Diameter is the full outside. Either or. You can do formulas either way. So as you decrease this, you decrease the distance for every turn of this object. So if your rope is here, it's turning a meter. If your rope is here, because this is 50, it's turning 150 millimeters. Okay? So that's concept one. Okay? Concept two is resistance. Your resistance, as speed increases, meaning as revolutions on this drum increase, because we're decreasing diameter as you fall, then, so that means if you're falling, it's speeding this object up, but you're actually falling less. So you're going faster here, but falling less distance. Now, as that happens, this needs to increase the resistance so that the combination decelerates you, descends you, okay? So those two interplay. Historically, they had big old fucking fans on there. You know, this is a 3-blader from out of the shop. The hub's not on it right now, and it just goes right on the end. And the faster this thing goes around, the more air it pushes. Now, if you know anything about airplanes, you know that they pitch propellers based on horsepower and performance, and in planes they have variable pitch propellers to maximize and optimize how much air is pushing versus the horsepower of the motor, etc. So that's kind of what we've gone through on these. When I started, they were big flat blades. Then we went to carbon fiber in a billet hub, so you could index the propeller blades for pitch. You could create more resistance. It's all the same fact. It's wind resistance. The faster you spin this thing, the more drag you get, because you're creating more thrust with the blades. So if it was an airplane, you'd be pulling more air, but here it's a resistance because this is turning that, so it's eating up the force that's on this. So those have been around forever, and that's the basic first way to do it. There are some disadvantages. One, they're loud. They make big, whirring, flopping, whooshing noises, especially as this gets faster and faster. On set, that's not optimal. Two, it's a big, rotating, bladed object out here that gets going really fucking fast. So that becomes a hazard. So you put a cage around the thing. In the days before health and safety, they just left them fly. Nobody cared because nobody got around them. The guy operating knew enough to not step over here and get whacked by it. Okay? Not only do you get whacked by it, but if it hits hard enough, you create a stutter in this, so you jerk your performer, and that can hurt. And we'll talk about why, because of the acceleration factor or negative acceleration of stopping and descending when you're pulling negative G's. So that became an issue. They still use them, like in Vegas at the Space Needle. You pay your $100 as a tourist and you go jump off the fucking top of this thing. And they use a drum that pretty much looks like this. It's really gentle. You get a nice free fall, and then it gradually just slows you until you stop. They bring you back up. You know, you can do it all day. Now, the profile of this cone and how much line is on this cone determines your deceleration curve. Less here, the shorter decel distance, the more G-forces, okay? So short, steep, hard, fast, short distance. Long, smooth, like this one, you get a very gentle, no G decel, okay? So they still use the fan ones there, and they're a big caged housing, but they're in an operator area, and nobody can get near them, and it's pretty straightforward. Nobody cares what it sounds like. You're out on the catwalk as the tourist jumping off. Nobody gives a shit. On set, we have a couple of parameters that have changed because we like to fall as much as possible and slow down as late as possible. Okay, so one of the primary tools for that has been a gold tail. It actually works quite well for a dinosaur caveman kind of situation. It's basically a friction brake. It's the same as wrapping a fucking rope around a pipe or wrapping it around a rail or it gives you friction of a known quantity, whatever that quantity is. 5 holes, 7 holes, 3 holes, blah, 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 okay? Y'all know about those. They work quite well up to a certain distance. They also decelerate things like when you have a ratchet pull where the guy's got to smack a wall, you put it in the tail and you slow him down and stop him right as he gets to that so he doesn't really hit the wall, it just looks like it. Things like that, they have multiple uses. They aren't really adapted to long distances. I mean, 10 meters, you've got rope management issues. Most guys, I use a non-twisting hollow core Dyneema SK99 that's got a tech jacket, zero stretch. It doesn't twist much, but any rope under friction as it progresses is going to twist, and some ropes twist way more than others, so you got that to deal with. And you get an asshole or two in a rope and all of a sudden it sticks in one of the holes or in the gold tail, you're in a world of hurt. Those sudden stutters or stops or jerks are not good, especially for the performer. So rope management gets to be a real issue, as well as long drops become an issue with all of that. The heat generated in the device, the type of rope you're using, but they're cool. You can fine tune them, thicker or thinner rope, more grippy rope versus slicker jacketed rope. You can have a lot of play in between them because we now don't bother to use typical just static lines. So there's no stretch, so you have to be very aware of what you're doing. That being said, rope management and everything gets to be, well, 10 meters works, but it's a pain in the ass. You got big loops off your things, off your gold tail. You've got to slide it through one hand to get to the decel point. Looks great. You can pull it 10 meters into a 3-meter sudden decel superhero drop. You'll pull 5 Gs. You'll pull 5 times the performer's body weight. So you got to think about that. And rope management is a hassle. And it's personal. It's a person controlling it. So if anything happens, you got no backup. I particularly like to automate them using bungee on the loose end of the rope so that as it goes through the tail, it pulls a certain quantity of bungee and tightens up so you get a progressive resistance there to the stop. It works quite nice and it takes the people reaction out of it. You can put a sandbag on the end of that. So as it does, it pulls the bag and now you've got added drag of the weight on the bungee or on the rope. You can play games, you can tune it. It's the best way to automate these so that you don't have to fucking handle them. Some guys are really good at it in short distances, 6, 7, 8, 9 meters, 10 meters. It's like it can be different every time from A to B to A to B, it's just different. So in order to make it the same, you automate it and it works great, but you still have rope management issues. Once you get over that point, or to avoid that point, you can automate it with one of these, turning drum descender. The nice thing about these is they're the same basically every time, and we made it more so because this, unlike others, doesn't have any helix grooves. Most of the guys go for a set descent profile with a helix groove cut in this, so it's like a big screw, and it goes from the running diameter to the stopping diameter in X distance with a helix groove. And the reason that is because this is as steep as you can go while the rope won't slide back down when you wrap it. If you go any steeper, meaning shorten this cone up so that the angle is steeper, you will have to put a groove in it, or else the rope won't stay where you put it. So you have then a defined length of decel, which if your jump height was the same every time, it would be great. But if you're going 10 meters or going 40 meters, it's a different decel. You don't want a 5-meter decel curve on a 10-meter drop. You don't want a 5-meter decel curve on a 50-meter drop. So then what guys have done is they've changed these drums and they cut them different sizes, and they're cool. I love it. They put on the short drop one, or they put on the long drop one. So it's more parts and pieces to change and do. On this one, I leave it off, but I set my distance of how much decel I want, and I space it accordingly on the cone since it will climb the cone itself, and I just mark. So if I want 3 meters, I put 3 meters on here from here to here. If I want 6 meters, I put 6 meters from here to here. And it just means the spacing of the helix gets wider or narrower over this distance because the rope will stay put where you put it. If it doesn't, you have to have a groove. So that's why you'll see a lot of them with grooves. And the grooves are cut on a lathe, or you can take a drum like this and add an additional helix as an add-on on the top and either weld it or bolt it in. But the fact is, the shorter you make this, the steeper it gets, the more you have to have a helix. Okay, otherwise the rope just comes off. And you'll go from big drum to a wad of shit at the bottom. It'll be like spinning like hell and then just a mess. Okay, so that's that. That's the cone. Now we get back to the rollout. The difference of variable resistance. The fan, the faster you spin it, more resistance you get. Then they went, because of the problems, a lot of guys opted for a closed loop hydraulic system. So you drive a chain or off of here or a belt or whatever to a hydraulic gear motor and a hydraulic pump motor. And what you do is have basically a loop of hose, to simplify it, in a circle, so it pumps out and it enters back in. And in the middle of that loop, where the oil is going around in a circle, you have a metering valve. And you can throttle it wide open or creep it down, which means at slow speeds, it's pressing it through the orifice it's not noticeable. But the faster that goes, the more fluid is circulating, the more it's trying to force oil through an orifice. As you throttle that down, it creates much more drag on this. So when you're winching the person up, or they're falling on here where it's only 1 revolution for every meter they fall, then you end up with no result. It looks free fall. But then as you speed up here, it really starts dragging down. So as the speed increases, the drag comes in, so that by the time you get down here, you're basically standing on the ground with no problems. They're cool. They have failure modes as well. All machines do. Failure mode there is temperature. Oil, we'll start with the basic mechanicals: blowing a hose, losing a seal, any catastrophic failure of mechanical stuff because you've overpressured the system because you haven't calculated how much pressure is going to generate at the RPMs on here. Then you've lost all your braking ability, okay? The second thing is temperature. At 5 degrees, like it is outside today, the oil's thicker than shit. And then you go to Saudi Arabia and start playing with the same device, none of your settings matter because it's thin like water. So unless you're going to change the oil for the temperature, then you have to learn to change the settings to match what's happening. Secondarily, as you use them, warm up, bag drops, people drops, as you progressively use them, because you're compressing oil through an orifice, it's generating heat. As the oil heats up, it thins out. So your settings will change. So these are all things to be aware of. They're not insurmountable. It just means that it's not like, I know a setting, set it on this setting, and it works, okay? Doesn't happen that way. So those are the drawbacks on hydraulic oil. Plus, oil's messy. It's icky stuff. So I'm not fond of them. I've built about 12 of these over the last umpteen years. And I've done them with fans, I've done them with hydraulics, and now in the last 10 years or so, we use something called eddy braking, which is a conductive, non-ferrous plate, meaning not steel, not iron, aluminum or copper would be ideal, that you put magnets in proximity to, and it creates a weird current in the conductive material that basically fights itself, so it slows it down. Think of turning an electric motor by hand when it's going through the various magnets in there. It's hard to turn. Well, it's the same concept here. It's the same thing they use on the adventure parks now, on there's the belay devices on climbing walls, indoor climbing walls. Basically, it's a circle of discs of magnets with a clutch that throws plates out if you fall. So suddenly you drop, it throws these levers out that are flat plates, and they're in proximity to these magnets. And as they pass one another, they slow it down. They absorb the force. That's what the belay devices do. The adventure parks also have the free fall ones where you can jump and glide to the ground. They're great. They're just too slow for stunt purposes, but they're the same concept. The same concept is used on the roller coasters to slow 100 mile an hour last coming down the giant loop-de-loo, and you stop in 30 meters at the stop. It's magnets along the rail that interact with the vehicle traveling past it. There's a whole lot of videos on YouTube of, you know, physics nerds and stuff dropping shit down inclines and watching it go past the magnets and stop, or dropping something down a tube that has magnets outside of it and you watch it just decel as it goes through the magnetic current. But remember, it's non-contact, so that's a huge thing. One last easy example for most of you guys, because we're all into fitness and all that, is the guys who ride bicycles. They use the old magnetic indoor trainers. All that is a rotating conductive surface next to magnets, and as you click the levers harder or softer, it moves more in and out of proximity, creating more drag. Okay, so that's the concept for that. Eddy braking is a whole black hole, and it's hard to calculate, and when you start doing the math with the drum, with that, it gets to be a pain in the ass. Trust me, I've been down that rabbit hole heavily the last 5 years. But I use that now because it's contactless, it's dead silent, it doesn't wear out, and it's failure mode. If anything happens while you're falling, it's going to slow you down, period. The faster this drum spins, the more force it generates, period. So there's no electricity required, there's nothing. So it doesn't matter if your operator drops dead while you're on your way down, you're going to slow down and end up at the right place. These should always be set. As a side note, we have brakes here just in case anything would happen, and the reason those brakes are there is at the top, the one drawback of that system, they're not a parking brake. You can't take something up and hold it on this drum with the magnet. Eddy currents are generated by movement, and the faster you move, the more they generate. So at no movement, they have no effect. So it's like you can't use them, like I said, as a parking brake. Here we can use them because the motor is geared so heavily. We use a motor to haul ourselves up because it's no fun hoiking people up by hand, and we don't usually have the option of having them disconnect and go up the elevator or the stairs if you're outside, you know, in a stage. They just, you're on the set, they want you to just go up and drop, go up and drop. So we put a winch motor on these and we drive it. As such, we have brakes that we hold the people while we prepare at the top, so they're held on the braking, and then this can go. A little note on the brakes, you shouldn't use them while the performer is falling because the speeds and the G-forces generated by abrupt braking over distance is brutal. And I'll get into that discussion really quickly. So we use them, and it brings another thing in just as part of the black hole. A lot of people have clutches on these. Most clutches work that you must pull a lever or a hydraulic line which throws out a bearing, which then presses on springs, which opens the friction plates. It is now in neutral. When you're in your car, you push on the pedal, you're in neutral. Your clutch is out, so you're coasting. Your motor, your drive is not coupled to your rolling ingredients. Okay, that's nice, but the failure mode on that is if you break a cable or lose hydraulics, you're fucked. So you're coupled. So that means industrial components have clutches you can use that are manual, and they are manually used with a lever action and a pickle fork to force the clutches into action and hold them and back them off. So those failure, if the clutch doesn't hold, is back to neutral as opposed to the other direction. Those will work, and I've installed those, and they're great. You just have to size them up for the forces generated when you're out from the center, because it's a lever. You know, if you're 150 millimeters out from the center, your force on this drum here is more than if it's just spinning here. So what happens is you don't calculate that, and then you can't wind up the drum up here because the weight is too much, the force is too much, and the clutch will slip then. It's an override. So these are all things that you have to work out. I went the easy way and have always, because the failure mode is on this, no problem. It's always going to lower you down. We just take it up. We have a belt drive. At the top, I lock the 4-piston brake because we have these monstrous brakes. And then I take the belt off. It takes 2 seconds. I mean, I can take the belt off as fast as you can move a lever over to decouple the clutch. Then I'm set, I let the brake off, and down you go. We also have a backup set of brakes, which is only a 2-piston caliper. It will stop you savagely, but it's much nicer. And if anything would happen, you can feather it and slow the person down without just brutally stopping them. So we have backups. If one lost power, say the 4-piston fucked at the top, We still have the 2, which will hold you in place, get the shot, you can play with it, okay? It's always backups for backups. Like I said, we like to have a winch attached. Guys have used capstan winches, they've done all of that. I use a 4 kilowatt motor with variable speed. This will pull on the outside of this drum, 400 kilos, wrap it up no problem. The reason it is so over-motored is because I can use this as a traction winch, which will give me 35 meters of A to B and back again travel, say to move a track or move something laterally. And because of the size of this and the gearing, every revolution of this is 1 meter. So I know that if I'm at max speed, the gearing here is about a 25% override, so I'm going to be going 1.25 meters every time I move this. If I'm dialed back a little bit, we're 1-to-1, then it's 1 meter every revolution. So I know what I'm doing in terms of travel. Also niceties, it's ramp up in speed, ramp up in decel, so when you chop the throttle, it doesn't just dead stop, so you don't have a lot of those issues. Everything's got programmable ramps on it, so you can use it for other things, but it's also a nice ride. And the reset at a meter per second on a 10-meter stage is a 10-second reset. Back up, off you go. Okay, so that's how these work. Decreasing diameter, increasing drag creates a descent profile. Okay, and you can play games with the length, you can play games with the abruptness. Remember, it's not the fall that hurts, it's the sudden deceleration or negative acceleration at the bottom that hurts. It's the splat factor. You know, it doesn't hurt till you hit the ground hard. Falling is no problem. So you've got to mitigate that, and it's how many G-forces. Stunt guys can pull a lot of Gs. So you can progressively make this much harder and much shorter than you would for anybody else. Witness the normal human drum and then something shorter and steeper. Now, something to realize, just as a side note, free fall. I don't know how many times I've been told by people, oh, I want them to fall faster. Well, you have to look at what the speed of free fall is and what the distances are and how fast they're actually going to be going. Because terminal velocity is about 55 meters per second squared, okay? So about 230 kilometers an hour, about 135 miles an hour. To get to that, it takes 12 seconds. In 12 seconds, you travel 1,500 meters, 400 plus meters, 400 plus meters, 1,500 feet, okay, in 12 seconds to get to terminal velocity. Because as you go faster, you have air drag, etc. Now there's speed flyers who can get to 300 km/h. They auger in, arms back, streamlined, helmets, point straight down. But generally, if you jump out of a plane, you're going to come down at a set rate of speed. It's going to take you 12 seconds to get to that speed, okay? Which is never going to go any higher because of air resistance against your body. So that's called terminal velocity. Now, if you look at the numbers on that, say you're on a stage, it's going to take, in 1 second, you're going to fall 9.8 meters, okay? 9.1 meters per second squared is gravity, okay? So in 1 second, you fall 9.8 meters, so 10 meters, okay? In 2 seconds, you'll fall 18. So think of stages. How many stages are over 10 or 12 meters? 15, 18, some. Some old hangars and stuff that are in England or in the States can be a lot higher, but you can calculate literally how long it's going to take. A normal stage, 12-meter stage, it's a little over a second by like 1.1 seconds. You know, an 18-meter stage, it's going to take 2 seconds, okay? Well, your speed does not increase that much in the first. It's exponential. It's meters per second squared. So the velocity formula, if you look it up, I could get into this and do this whole thing, but everybody will go to sleep. Your velocity increases up to 53 meters per second squared over 12 seconds. So at the beginning, you aren't really going that fast. And then at the end, you really accelerate because it's a square, okay? So as that happens, in normal filming world, 1 or 2 seconds, you're never going to see much more fall than that. So for our intents and purposes, it's almost a constant velocity. Okay, you're falling at a pretty constant velocity. So the weight that spins this X speed is the same weight that's spinning this X speed. Okay, the difference is X speed is only so much distance. Okay, so over so much distance, which essence means it's slowing you down because you aren't falling as far. So you're falling, but then as you pick up speed, you're spinning this drum faster, so you aren't going as far. Okay, so in essence, you are slowing down or equalizing, and that's when your drag comes in by going faster there to compensate for this. Okay, it's yeah, have some fun, look up free fall formulas, and you can calculate when you jump off. You know, it's 1 second from jumping off the reds to hitting the floor on most stages, maybe 1.1 seconds. And that's if you're all by yourself. Boom, splat. That's what you get. And you can calculate the speed you're gonna hit at, okay, which is 9.8 meters per second if it's, you know, a 10-meter stage. And then you can put 9.8 meters per second into a km/h velocity formula and come up with how many kilometers an hour you actually hit the floor or miles per hour you hit the floor. So play with those formulas. They're all on the internet now. We used to just look them up in books. I have a library full of them. But those are all the things that play into what we do, and it's the simple act of slowing someone down so it looks really cool when they fall or get jump or whatever over distance. And this is a great tool for that. This is on wheels. I can wheel it in, and instead of putting in a capstan, a piece of truss with a capstan, a clutch, a gold tail, to be able to winch them up 10 meters or 12 meters, unlock everything and drop them, to put in that setup is relatively more time consuming than it is just wheel this down and anchor it down. It's got anchor points and just done. So you can sometimes, I mean, people think it takes a long time, but it's wheeling one piece of equipment in. So there are better options to do the job. Like I said, 10 meters for me is 10, 12 meters is kind of the limit on gold tails, I think, my personal opinion. And I'm sure there's a million guys out there who are going to tell me how amazing they are with 30-meter gold tail drops. Yeah, you can do them, especially if you automate them. Yes, rope management a problem? Yes. You got to be very aware of it. All those things play in. Can you do it? Yeah. Has it been done? Yeah. Is there an easier way to do it? Yeah. So that's kind of the thing on descenders. As a machine, it has to have backups like this. The motor fails, it has its own electric power failure brake. It breaks its brake, and I can override it to lower people. Interlocks on the power-ups and interlocks on the starts and stops. All those things are important. It's a machinery, so you've got to follow a machinery directive. You cover yourself, but it's a nice, easy way to get the same result every time. And it's no stress deal, okay? So that's a kind of an overlook at descenders today. While we're in the shop, listening to the saw churn away in the background, while we get into just cutting some big heavy shit again. Yeah, it's just another day in the shop. Take it easy, guys. Bye.